Now these are the 10-year series questions for combined science chemistry. Okay, this is November 2002, paper 1, question 8. The approximate pH values of aqueous solutions of 4 substances commonly used in cooking are shown. Which substance could be taken to neutralize excess acid in the stomach? Now, what will neutralize excess acid? Okay, so alkali will neutralize acid. Okay, alkali and acid, the reaction between alkali and acid is called neutralization. So you have to look for an alkali here. So the alkali, so this is an alkali because the pH is more than 7. This is alkali, neutral, acidic. Of course, 3 is more acidic than 4. So the answer for this question is very straightforward. It is an alkali. Now let's look at the next question. Year 2002, paper 1, question 9. Now, which of the following does not react with dilute sulfuric acid? So for this question, you need to recall what are the reactions that involve acid. If you recall from your mind map, this is your mind map, and you need to remember the reactions that involve acid. Okay, reaction of acid with reactive metal to form salt and hydrogen, reaction between acid and carbonate, salt, carbon dioxide and water, as well as acid and metal oxides and metal hydroxide to form salt and water. So you need to be aware of these 3 reactions that involve acid. So for this one, does not react. Magnesium hydroxide is an alkali. So alkali does react with acid to form salt and water. Okay, so this one react with acid. How about magnesium metal? Magnesium metal is a reactive metal. How do we know? Because the unreactive metal would be metal like copper and silver, etc. So, and magnesium is not one of them. So magnesium is a reactive metal and hence it would react with acid. How about magnesium nitrate with acid? Will there be any reaction? Again, if you recall from the mind map, the reaction, there is no reaction between acid and a nitrate. There is no nitrate here. Therefore, acid and nitrate, there is acid and magnesium nitrate. In this case, there is no reaction. There is no reaction, does not react, so the answer should be C. If we look at the last option, magnesium oxide, we know that magnesium oxide is actually an alkali and base. Okay, so your acid react with base to form salt and water. Acid also react with alkali to form salt and water. Okay, very straightforward. Acid and nitrate, no reaction. Okay, the next question is year O-level, year 2003, paper 1, question 7. Which word describes the reaction between hydrochloric acid and sodium hydroxide? Hydrochloric acid is an acid, sodium hydroxide is an alkali. So acid and alkali, the reaction is called neutralization reaction. Okay, is B. Number 4, this is year 2003, paper 1, question 8. 4 aqueous solutions have the pH values shown in the table. If pairs of solutions are mixed, which pair must produce an acidic mixture? So you mix any 2 of these solutions, and which mixture must be acidic? So you look at P and Q. P is acidic, pH is 2. Q is also acidic. So acidic solution mixed with acidic solution, of course you will get acidic mixture. Okay, so the answer is A. Let's look at the second option, B, P and R. Acidic solution and alkali. Acidic, alkali mixed together, it could be anything. It could be become acidic, it could become alkali, or it can become neutral. But the question say mass produced. So it doesn't mean that, oh, pH 2 and pH 8, so I just add these two and then I take the average, okay, which is actually 5. So 5 is acidic. I mean, you cannot do it in that way because it will not guarantee, I mean, it doesn't work in that way. Okay, it doesn't work in that way. The pH doesn't mean that the pH of the mixture between P and R is 5. No. So P and R is off. P and S also, you cannot just take the average of these two pH, and Q and R also, okay, because the question say mass produce an acidic mixture, so it must be acidic and acidic mixed together. Okay, let's look at year 2003, paper 1, question 9. Which two substances react to form a salt and water only? Salt and water. Again, try to recall the reactions that involve acids and bases. The acids and bases chapter. What will give salt and water? Salt and water, there will be, again, recall from your mind map. Salt and water would be between acid and metal oxides and metal hydroxides. So it can be acid and alkali or acid and base. Both of these would give you salt and water. Okay, let's look at the options one by one. Dilute ethanoic acid and aqueous sodium hydroxide. Dilute ethanoic acid is an acid. Aqueous sodium hydroxide is an alkali. So acid and alkali will give you salt and water. So the answer is A. Ethanoic acid is our vinegar. It's a weak acid. How about the second option? Dilute hydrochloric acid and zinc. This is actually the reaction between acid and a reactive metal, which will give you salt and hydrogen. The third option, dilute sulfuric acid and aqueous sodium carbonate. This is a reaction between acid and carbonate. Acid and carbonate, again, recall from the mind map. Acid and carbonate will give you salt, water and carbon dioxide. Okay, but the question says form a salt and water only. Let's look at the last one, aqueous silver nitrate and aqueous sodium chloride. Now this one will give you silver chloride and sodium nitrate. Okay, so for this question the answer is A. Now let's look at the next question. This is a question from the salt chapter. 2004 paper 1 question 8. Which salt can be prepared by the reaction between a soluble metal hydroxide and dilute sulfuric acid? Okay, for this question, this is a reaction between a soluble metal oxide and a soluble metal hydroxide and dilute sulfuric acid. Now if you recall, soluble metal hydroxide. So metal hydroxide is a base. Soluble metal hydroxide means soluble base. Soluble base is actually an alkali. So this is actually an alkali. And of course dilute sulfuric acid is an acid. So acid and alkali, you get salt and water. So if I have metal hydroxide react with sulfuric acid, I'll get a salt. And then the name of the salt, there are two parts. The second part must be sulfate. So it will give me something sulfate. and of course your water. So what thing sulfate here? This something sulfate. This something here would be the metal, because sulfate is from the acid. Okay, the anion is from the acid, and the cation, the positive ion of this salt, is actually from the metal. Okay, so we look at the salt, copper 2 hydroxide. So if the salt, I mean a copper 2 sulfate, so if the salt here is copper 2 sulfate, of course this would be copper 2 hydroxide. Then you have to ask yourself, copper 2 hydroxide, is it soluble? Copper 2 hydroxide, it is not soluble, because if you look at your solubility table, all the hydroxide, if you look at your solubility table, all the hydroxides are not soluble except group 1, 2 or ammonium. Okay, and copper 2 hydroxide, it is not, copper 2 is not from group 1 or 2, and it is not ammonium. Therefore copper 2 hydroxide is not soluble. Same thing with iron 2 sulfate. If over here is iron 2 sulfate, this will be iron 2 hydroxide. And iron 2 hydroxide, it is not an iron 2, it is not from group 1 or 2, and it is not an ammonium. So iron 2 hydroxide is not soluble. Same with lead 2 sulfate. Lead 2, it is, okay, lead is not from group 1 or 2, and it is not ammonium. And lead, so lead 2 sulfate is not soluble. Okay, potassium sulfate, yeah, potassium sulfate. So potassium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide is a group 1 hydroxide, so it is soluble. So this metal hydroxide, which is potassium hydroxide, would be soluble. So the answer is D. So you have to work it out like this to find out what do you mean by which salt can be prepared. So this is the name of the salt. The first part of it comes from the metal here, and then the question said this metal hydroxide must be soluble. So you have to check against your solubility table to find out whether the metal hydroxide is soluble or not, and try to recall that all hydroxide is not soluble except group 1 or 2 or ammonium hydroxide.